Hello, Made to Thrive Nation. I've got the sleep doctor of sleep doctors on the show today. It's really exciting. He is the most well-known sleep doctor in the world. He's been on the Dr. Oz show over 40 times. He's a multiple author. He's been on Jim Quick's podcast that I absolutely love and many others. So welcome to the show, Dr. Michael Breus.
Well, thank you. That's quite an introduction. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be seeing Jim Quick later today. He happens to be in town. He's a dear friend. So I'm excited to get a chance to get my memory back in order.
Well, brilliant. And you're part of that journey in terms of sleep, and sleep is so crucially important. In South Africa, Dr. Breus, South Africa is known as probably the second or third most stressful country in the world to live in by Bloomberg. We've got high levels of stress here, or distress, should I rather say, and sleep is a fundamental pillar to that. So I want to dive straight in, and I want you to really just give us a definition. I do want to talk about archetypes. I want to talk about all things sleep-wise, but let the sort of viewers on YouTube and the audience know, what is sleep?
Yes. Okay. So sleep is an involuntary process, right? It happens whether you want it to or not. I mean, some people might want to try and stay up for days. But it's really, I would argue that two words can kind of describe sleep the best. It's recovery and it's healing, right? That's what sleep really is in a nutshell. Now, to break it open, it's an incredibly complicated process. It's quite interesting because a lot of people are like, well, tell me everything I need to know about sleep. Well, we could be here for quite a while if we did something along those lines. But let me give everybody some of the basics so that way we're all speaking kind of the same language, right? So sleep in and of itself is a two-process model inside your brain. It turns out there are two separate things that have to go on together in order for you to fall asleep. Now, one thing to remember is sleep follows the core body temperature rhythm. So as your body warms up, it gets to a peak around 10:30. Then that core body temperature begins to fall. That falling of temperature is a signal to the brain to release melatonin. For folks out there, remember, melatonin is kind of that key that starts the engine for sleep. It's not everything, but you can't sleep without melatonin. And it really does follow this temperature curve. And so in science, when we follow a curve or we follow a known scenario, that gives us an opportunity to really evaluate what's going on throughout that 24-hour cycle. So what is going on? These two processes, one is called sleep drive. The other is called sleep rhythm, okay? Now, I'm going to break those down in just a second. So the way we think of sleep drive is a lot like hunger, right? So I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. I eat something, and that hunger begins to dissipate. The same holds true with sleep. So when a cell eats a piece of glucose, something comes out the back end. One of those things is adenosine. Adenosine works its way through your system. It goes to a very specific receptor site in your brain. And as adenosine accumulates, you get sleepier and sleepier and sleepier. So that's what really we think is sleep drive. By the way, the technical term for that is the homeostatic drive for sleep. Not that you have to know that, but we might as well just throw it out there. So sleep drive is this buildup of adenosine. By the way, if you look at the molecular structure of adenosine and the molecular structure of caffeine, they're off by one molecule, which is kind of weird when you think about it, right? Like the thing that my head makes that makes me sleepy versus the external substance that keeps me awake are literally off by one single molecule. We're going to show people how to use that to their advantage in the future. Brilliant. The second system is circadian rhythm, right? So we talked about drive. Now we're going to talk about rhythm. So also a lot like hunger, we see that people get hungry, around breakfast time, around lunchtime, and around dinner time, right? The same holds true with sleep. Most people, at least here in North America, have a tendency to go to bed somewhere between 10 and 11 o'clock at night as a general kind of guideline. Why? Because their circadian rhythm is basically telling them it's bedtime. The way it does this is it senses light in and around our bodies. And when there's a lot of light, you're supposed to be awake. And not a lot of light, you're supposed to be asleep. And so that's kind of how the system works. So these two systems work in conjunction with one another. The second part of the equation is, well, what about stages, Dr. Breus? And what about sleep cycles? And how do all those nonsensical things work? Well, they actually work pretty well. And we actually know a lot about them. So it turns out that there are 5 stages of sleep, not 4, 5, because we call wake a stage of sleep. Then there's stage 1, stage 2, stages 3 and 4 have actually been combined. And then there's stage REM or REM sleep. So let's break that down. I'll tell you what each one does, and then we can start to move on.
Sure.
So stage 1 is merely the doorway into sleep. It's the transition from wake to sleep. It doesn't represent a large part of the sleep cycle, maybe 2 to 5% maximum, right? So very, very small. Stage 2, however, is the biggie. It represents sometimes 45, sometimes 50% of your night. Most of the sleep trackers that we see out there combine stage 1 and stage 2, and they call it light sleep, which is not a bad definition, to be fair, right? It is kind of lighter stages of sleep. We know that that stage of sleep, stage 2 in particular, is where certain things happen with an area of your brain called your thalamus, and you start producing these things that are actually called spindles and K complexes, which are actually helpful for memory and a few other things is what we're starting to learn. But to be fair, most of the time, we don't really care much about stage 2 or stage 1 sleep. We're really wanting to get to the good stuff, right? And the good stuff is stages 3 and 4. Again, that's a combination, what we call deep sleep now, or delta sleep. This is your physical restoration. This is your wake up and feel great sleep, right? So this is where the body goes into that true recovery mode from a physical perspective, right? So it's kind of like bringing your car into the body shop, you know, and getting the dents and the dings and the scratches kind of pulled out. That happens every single night. There's 2 main functions of stage 3, 4 as we know it right now during this physical restoration process, okay? So one is something was recently discovered about the last 10 years called the glymphatic system. So the glymphatic system, I call it the waste management system for the brain, right? It's like the dump truck that comes in and pulls all the crap out so that way you don't end up getting Alzheimer's. Now, actually, that's, believe it or not, exactly what happens. There are 2 proteins in particular called beta amyloid and tau, which have a tendency to wrap around the nerves. And when they do that, they strangle them, and that's called Alzheimer's. So this stage 3, 4 sleep comes in and scoops out all that beta amyloid and all that tau. So if you do things to mess up your stage 3, 4 sleep, it's not good for your brain, okay? It's just not good for your brain. The second thing that stage 3, 4 does, which is really interesting, is it's the largest bolus of what we call growth hormone. So for folks out there who are in the fitness, right, growth hormone is your friend. That's what helps you build muscles. That's what helps all these other things happen. But it doesn't happen during the daytime. It only happens at night, and it only happens during stage 3, 4 sleep. So these are 2 extremely important functions of stage 3, 4 sleep. And to be fair, a lot of people don't realize it, but they don't get a whole lot of stage 3, 4 sleep because of stupid shit that they're doing during the day, right? Like drinking too much caffeine or exercising too close to bedtime or having a lot of alcohol. And to be fair, I do all of those things, okay? Like I like all of that stuff. So when I talk to people, it's when and where do you do those things and how are they going to have an effect on your sleep?
Brilliant. Let's just talk about, go for it.
Got one more stage. We got to get to REM sleep, and then we'll jump on in. I know I'm a little bit of a chatter. I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
Trying to get everybody on the same page here. So the final one is REM sleep, which stands for rapid eye movement sleep. This is the mental part of sleep. So we just talked about the physical restoration. REM is the mental. So what we've discovered with REM sleep in particular is that this is where you move information from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. Okay. Now, this is an important process because you need to retrieve information, right? Because maybe you need to remember what the code is to get into your bank account or how to ride a bike or whatever. All of that happens during REM sleep. The process of moving information from that short-term storage area to the long-term kind of hard drive, if you will, we think that process is dreaming. Okay. So the act of dreaming is our mind's mental representation in our kind of inside of our head of this movement of information. That's one of the things that we think is happening with dreaming. The other is emotional processing. So we know that, for example, with our nightmare patients, when they wake up because they're scared of their dream, they stop emotionally processing the thing that they were thinking about, that traumatic event, and they're stuck. And that's why so many people have a repeat of this nightmare over and over, is because they wake up and they never finish processing REM sleep. So there are now, believe it or not, dream therapists, not dream interpreters. I want to be very clear about this, okay? Dream interpretation is pretty much BS, but dream therapy, like Jungian trained, several years in training, like these people know what they're doing. And it's really interesting when you work with some of these trauma victims with nightmares, is because you can get them to start to process that information, and then the nightmare goes away. Wow. So that was my long-winded version of how do we look at all of these things. And by the way, sleep comes in cycles. So when we fall asleep, we go to stage 1, then stage 2, 3, 4, back to 2, and into REM sleep. That little dance maneuver has to happen in that order. And it takes somewhere between 80 and 120 minutes to do that. Most people have between 4 and 5 sleep cycles. So that's kind of the basics of how sleep works in terms of rhythm, drive, stages, and cycles. Now I think everybody's kind of got the language together so we can really talk intelligently about sleep.
Brilliant. What a summary. Excellent. I think that gives such a big overview for Africans here. But I wanted to talk about sleep trackers, because I think these cycles are so important. And, you know, we've brought a lot of Aura rings. I was with a whole bunch of corporate execs as well. We've used the Whoop. We've used other devices as well. But how important is REM sleep and deep sleep in terms of the amount of REM and deep sleep you get? It might fit into your archetypes. It might even fit into your sort of ecto or endomorphs out there, or, you know, your body shape. But tell us how important, how much time, and other than REM sleep giving you from short term to long term, what else does REM do? Because a lot of people are cannibalizing REM with their deep. And, you know, I had a client today. She was an exec at a huge bank here in Africa, and she had 4 hours of REM sleep and 3 hours of deep sleep. And then everybody looked at her and said, I'm getting 35 minutes of REM sleep and an hour and a half of deep sleep. Something's wrong here. So give us the nuts and bolts on REM and deep, and how much actually do people need out there?
Yep. So this is a good question, but it's a little complicated. So I'm going to start out by explaining trackers and how trackers are good and how trackers are bad. Okay. So number one, and we've talked a little bit about, we were talking about the Oura Ring, but this applies to all trackers, Whoop, Fitbit, Apple, I don't care. All right. So here's the bottom line, is they've actually done head-to-head studies looking at accuracy. All right. So let's be very clear. The best one out there as of right now is the Oura Ring in terms of accuracy. It's been put up against full nighttime polysomnography, which is a sleep study. And it's been found to be 85% accurate to a full night sleep study. To be honest with you, that's about as good as it gets. Okay. When we go from sleep study, like if I have somebody in my sleep lab for multiple nights, it's about an 85% chance on either side that we're going to get good data. So this is a decent one, but I want to be very clear about something. This is the cream of the crap. Okay. This is the best of the worst. Sleep is an incredibly complicated process, right? And so here's the bottom line. I can get about 3 pieces of data from a ring or a wristband, right? I can get temperature. If you got the ring, that's one of the nice benefits, by the way, of the ring form factor versus the wristband form factor. That's why the rings have a tendency to be a bit more accurate. But generally speaking, kind of looking across them, you don't look at your specific number. And that's why I wanted to answer the question this way. Because a lot of people say, oh my God, I got 3 hours of deep sleep and I got 2 minutes of REM sleep. Bullshit. Here's what really happened is your ring, it was consistently inaccurate. Okay. So what I'm interested, if every single day it says I get 13 minutes of REM sleep, there's probably no universe where that's actually accurate, but the ring, the wristband, the watch, whatever is consistently being inaccurate. So I don't really care. Where do I care? When you go from 13 minutes to 400 minutes to 200 minutes, I want to know what happened in the delta. I want to know about the trend that we're seeing, not these consistently thing going across. So in your example where somebody said, I got 3 hours of REM and 4 hours of deep, I'm going to be very clear. There's no universe where that actually happened. They did not actually get 3 hours of REM and 4 hours of deep. Unless there's only one situation where I think that could occur, and that would be in somebody who'd been maybe up for like 3 or 4 days, right? And had really sleep deprived themselves. At that point, your body goes to those stages before it goes to the light stuff, because the light stuff, again, doesn't mean as much as what we were talking about. A healthy amount is what you asked about. So healthy amount, about 25% deep sleep and about 25% REM sleep. It's 45% stage 2 and about 5% stage 1. So, but again, I want to be very clear. Everybody's different. I've never gotten an amazing score on my Oura Ring, and I'm the freaking sleep doctor, okay? So it's like, you've got to realize everything has got to be adjusted or personalized to your body, right? So when I look to people, the first question I ask them is, when you wake up in the morning, within 2 or 3 minutes, how do you feel? Do you feel like, oh crap, I want to go back to sleep? Or do you hit the snooze button? Then you're not getting good sleep quality. That's time to investigate. But let's say you wake up after 6 hours and you feel like you're ready to meet the day and everything's good. I don't think I care, right? Like, go for it. Like, be your best self, right? At the end of the day, understanding that it's personal for sleep becomes incredibly, incredibly important.
So it's important about the trends. If I had to just sort of summarize, the trends more important than actually being accurate. And correct. I think it's probably more precision is it makes the same errors at least. So when you are coaching a client, because we coach people all over the world, when you're coaching a client, then at least you know what's happening with the trends. And if they're getting 3 minutes of REM and an hour and a half when they're on holiday, then you know there's a problem possibly when they're working.
Right, exactly. And you can make some of those type of assumptions that way, which makes a lot of intuitive sense. I think that's a smart way to look at it.
Brilliant. Now let's talk about heart rate variability because it's linked to sleep, and just talk about how important that is, the difference between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And the reason I'm talking about it, you know, the listeners are very educated when it comes to HRV and a lot of breathwork techniques and meditation and exercise and sunlight and all those things that can improve HRV. How much value do you place on HRV?
So to be fair, it's a new old statistic, right? So we've known about HRV for a long time, but only fairly recently did we start to really look at heart rate variability. By the way, that's what HRV stands for, if you guys don't know. Yeah. And it looks at how much variability is there in your heart rate, and that's a general measure of health. And so what we like to see is we like to see that number in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. And for people who train, it can be in the 60s and the 70s, things of that nature. That's where we'd like to see it. But I want to be clear about something. There is no one statistic or measurement that you have to get 100% right every time. Now, HRV is a great one to monitor as a general guideline. So I look at my HRV personally, I'd say maybe once a day. Or once every other day. So what I do is I have a very specific morning routine where I do my fitness in the morning times after my meditation and after my breath work. And what I discovered is I can look at my HRV and it gives me an idea of kind of what my readiness is for the next day, or how I'm going to be performing in whatever I happen to do, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, what have you. So I use HRV, but I don't swear by it. What I swear by is when I wake up in the morning, how do I feel? If I feel pretty good, my day is going to be okay.
Brilliant. You know? Now, what about people that have poor sleep quality and quantity? Have you seen it correlate to HRV plummeting?
Yes. Absolutely. So one of the things we have seen is HRV goes down when people are not getting great sleep. And so if all of a sudden you wake up and after 2 weeks, all of a sudden your HRV is kind of taking a nosedive and you've noticed I am only getting like 3 or 4 hours of sleep, that is more than likely the cause. So when we talk about HRV, let's just break that down and what it is. I mean, you said your guys know a lot about it and gals know a lot about it, but as a general idea, heart rate variability has a lot to do with the nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is broken down into 2 branches. There's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Now, to be fair, I can never remember the difference between the 2. So this is how I remember it, is the Rolling Stones had this song called Sympathy for the Devil a long time ago. And I remember that song, and it was really kind of fun and up song. So sympathetic is that fight or flight, and parasympathetic is that rest and digest, right? And that's the recovery component to it. But I want to be very clear about something. If you don't have a good sympathetic, your parasympathetic isn't going to work well either. It's really about a balance between the 2. You don't want to have too much of one or too much of the other. Otherwise, you're not going to get your performance results that you're looking for, specifically in sleep and or other performance goals.
Brilliant. Let's talk about REM sleep. You said from short-term memory to long-term. What is deep specifically? Maybe you can sort of give us some points. Okay, if someone's getting some good deep sleep, they're going to feel these benefits. If someone's getting significant REM sleep, they're going to get these benefits, so that people can understand why those 2 sleep cycles are so important.
Yeah, so great question. So one of the things when I talk to my patients, one of the first things I ask them is, do you ever walk into a room and forget why you're there? Do you lose your car keys a lot? Or do you go to the grocery store and you have to write down a list because you can't remember the items? That's REM sleep, 100%. So it's this daily memorial functioning has a lot to do with the quality of the sleep you're getting, specifically how much REM sleep are you getting, right? That's one of the biggest aspects to REM sleep that I would argue is out there, is looking at it from that quality perspective. A lot of people like to look at quantity, because you can identify how much, but it really has a lot to do with the amount, as well as, this is going to sound a little strange, but the height of the waveforms themselves. So now we're getting super technical. So when you're looking at the EEG, or the brain waveforms of somebody in REM sleep, you're looking for some very specific patterns to occur. These patterns can occur at a low level, or they can occur at a high level. So as an example, if I'm looking at the sleep of an 18-year-old male versus me, a 54-year-old male, our REM sleep is going to look a lot different, right? And the reason I bring that up is because the trackers, they only have one definition of REM sleep, and that's what they're looking for. So this is where, for example, if you age, like all of us are supposed to do, this may not be as accurate in the future. But REM sleep turns out to be incredibly important as we age because of the memory aspects to it as well. And so when we look at that actual transfer of information, that's where we think, like I said before, that whole idea of dreaming comes in, or this manifestation in our second mind, if you will, of kind of what's going on. I want to be clear to people, though, if you don't remember your dreams, that does not mean that you did not get REM sleep. A lot of people say to me, oh, I dreamt last night, so I know I got good sleep. That really doesn't have anything to do with one way or another, because believe it or not, you can actually dream in any stage of sleep. You're just more likely to be dreaming in REM sleep. So again, when you're looking at metrics and things like that, my favorite metric is, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? But the biggest thing I would say, if people wanted to know, like, what's the one thing that I need to do to keep my REM sleep and my deep sleep in order, believe it or not, this is going to sound strange, but it's wake up at the same time every single day, including the weekends, by the way. That is critically important. And a lot of people don't understand why that is, or the biology behind it. Do you want me to explain that real quick?
Let's go into that. I think that's very important. And maybe you take us through, SteveStavs in the morning. We've got a mantra that the first, hour, 2 hours is very important from a sunlight perspective. But let's just start in the morning and how important it is with regards to the things you do, like wake up consistently and like go to bed consistently.
Yep. So I'll be very clear. I'm more interested in people waking up consistently than going to bed consistently. And I want to explain why. So when we wake up in the morning, sunlight comes in. Now that we're on regular standard time here in the United States, do they do that in South Africa? Do they
no daylight saving.
You're so lucky, bro, because it messes everybody up over here, because you're waking up in the dark, which is really bad for you. Yeah. So when you wake up and it's light out, that's good, because the light hits your eyeball and you have these special cells in your eye called melanopsin cells. These send a signal to your brain to turn off the melatonin faucet in your head. So when you wake up and you see light, it boom, shuts things down immediately. So what you want to do is, number one, wake up in the light. Number two, if it's not light out yet because you're waking up super duper early, get some sunlight, whether it's through a light box or through actual sunlight that you can actually get. But here's the thing that a lot of people tell me. They're like, well, that's fine, but Michael, I want to sleep in on the weekends. Let me tell you why that's a really stupid idea, okay? So it wakes you up and turns off the melatonin faucet, but it does something else that a lot of people don't know. It sets a timer in your brain for when to produce melatonin again. But here's the key concept that very few people understand. This is going to sound strange, but your brain can't tell time. So here's what I mean by that. If you're waking up at 6 a.m. 5 days a week, and melatonin shuts off because you get the sunlight, 14 hours later, melatonin turns on roughly. So you're going to turn on around 8, which means you'll be able to go to bed around 9:30, 10 o'clock, no problem. However, if you were waking up at 6 and then Saturday morning you say to yourself, I'm going to wake up at 8, I'm going to sleep in for an extra 2 hours, your brain doesn't reset that timer. It's still a 14-hour timer. So when you wake up at 8, your melatonin isn't coming on board then until 10. And then you're not able to fall asleep, which puts you up later, more exhausted, more messed up, changes the quality of your sleep. So the consistency of the wake up time turns out to be, if of all things, that is the one thing that you really want to do. Now, when you look at the consistency of the wake up time, the first question people say is, well, what time should I wake up, Michael? I mean, come on, like, what should I do? So the good news is I actually developed a quiz that people can take called the Chrono Quiz. And it's based on these things called Your Chronotype. So people out there may or may not know what a chronotype is. So do you mind if I do a quick little...
Go for it. I love the quiz. I'm a bear and I've done it many times and it's proved me a bear.
Awesome.
Although at medical school, I thought I actually was a wolf because I studied until 2 o'clock in the morning. So maybe we can go through that, the chronotypes.
Yeah, we can talk about that for sure. So what I discovered was that there are these chronotypes. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not the guy that discovered chronotypes. Those have been around since the 70s, even earlier, quite frankly. Back in the 70s, they made this questionnaire called the Morningness, Eveningness Questionnaire, or the MEQ. Great questionnaire. Lots of research has been done on it. Very interesting group. What I discovered approximately 8 or 9 years ago was I was working with a patient and I discovered what I think is a fourth chronotype. So we know there are early birds, we know there are night owls, and we know there are people in between. That's what a chronotype, that's what those chronotypes are. My discovery was there's a fourth chronotype that actually represents anxiety and insomnia. So that's where things got very interesting very quickly. And I wrote my book called The Power of When, because when you do something matters, right? And so here's where it gets interesting. So let's say that you said you thought in medical school you were a night owl, right?
Yeah. Well, what happened was, like, I used to be able to study from 11 till 2 in the morning. I used to study well, but I hated waking up early and I'd hate just rush to the exams. And then as I got older and kids and life and exercise, I started saying, oh, I can rather sleep at 10 and wake up at like 5:30. And I didn't enjoy staying up until 11, 12 o'clock. And I didn't have focus then like I did at medical school. I just thought it was just an age thing, but it'd be good to get your point of view there.
So it is an age thing. And here's the interesting thing is, yes, chronotypes are genetic, meaning we cannot change them. However, they do change themselves over time, right? So when we're itty bitty babies, infants, we're lions, we're early birds, we're early to bed, early to rise, getting up, all that kind of stuff. But when our children are maybe 2 years old to about 6 years old or 7 years old, they're bears, they're in between, right? They get up around 6:30, 7 o'clock, 7:30, you know, they're getting a little later in their mornings, they're going to bed a little bit later at night. Then you hit the teenage years. Well, everybody pretty much becomes a night owl during teenage years, unless you're an athlete, right? Because a lot of athletes have to get up super early and they do 2-a-day practices. So it really throws their schedule off. But genetically, they actually want to stay up late and sleep late, because every adolescent does. Then you hit that 18, 20-year-old range and you kind of lock and load for about 20 years. Then when you get old like me, I'm 54, it changes again. So you ever notice how your grandparents say things like, hey, I want to go to dinner, but it's 4:30 in the afternoon? That's because their chronotype has changed and now they've become early birds, right? That's why we see all of these older folks who are going to dinner early in the evenings and things of that nature. So we call this idea chrono longevity, meaning you go through all of the chronotypes throughout your lifetime. Your body does have a tendency to stick to one or another one during that kind of 30-year run between 20 and, let's say, 50. Now, when you're in medical school, that's kind of a different situation, right? Because of all the pressure, all the time, and all the commitments, all of those type of things. So I would argue that you became a shift worker while you were doing your residencies and things like that, right? Because you got stuck on a shift. And, you know, when you're the new resident, you get the shitty shift, like happens every time, right? Yeah. So you're the guy or gal that's working from 7 at night till 7 in the morning in the ER or wherever. And that level of adrenaline is what's keeping people awake because of the excitement of it. From a studying perspective, it's kind of the same idea, is you just get yourself into that mode and your body just starts to know what to do. And that level of consistency can be helpful. Now, getting back to the original point, which is wake up time and chronotype, here's what's interesting, is each one of the chronotypes has a slightly different wake up time. So if you're an early bird, or what I call a lion, your wake up time could be anywhere between 5:30 and probably 6:30 in the morning, right? And that's natural. That's not with an alarm, folks. That's your brain wakes up and says, let's go, right? That's an early person, right? Middle of the road people, they have a tendency to naturally wake up around 7, 7:15, 7:30 even. Night owls, ooh, it's rough. they want to get up closer to 8, maybe even 8:30 if they can, but a lot of them can't because they got to get to work by 9 o'clock. So a lot of them are getting up earlier than they should and missing out on that last little bit of REM sleep, which could be quite helpful for them. And then the insomniacs, they're a rough bunch. And those are, I call them dolphins. What we work with them is we actually give them a very specific sleep schedule to follow. And then we can start to see how we need to move it around because their schedules can be kind of variable. But again, knowing what time you want to wake up, and by the way, I tell you this when you take the chrono quiz. So if you go to chronoquiz.com and you take the quiz, you'll get an email back from me that will tell you all kinds of stuff like best time of day to drink coffee, best time of day to have alcohol, best time of day to go to sleep. But the most popular question that I get asked is what's the best time of day for sex? That is by far the most popular question. So at the end of this podcast, we're going to reveal the answer to that. So everybody has to listen to the whole podcast and give us a great rating and subscribe. And then we'll tell you the best time of day for sex.
Brilliant. And I've done the quiz and I've sent the quiz to many of my clients, especially my executives when we do corporate wellness. I think very beneficial, really. And the one question I did have, and I'm so glad I got you on the show, are these chronotypes applied to the people like in the blue zones, or is it modernity that has really like brought on artificial lights, non-native electromagnetic fields, all the things we're doing that have come into the industrial age? Is this something that applies to people across the board?
It does. And here's what we've discovered is people in the blue zones react better because they don't have all of these crazy other things that are affecting their health, like extramagnetic fields and processed food and lack of sunlight and all of those different things. And so when we start to, like Loma Linda, I think is one of those areas here in California that's known as a blue zone area, and a lot of that, what goes on there. I will tell you this, one of the biggest things that in my reading of the blue zone literature is that community is really one of the biggest focuses. So what does that have to do with sleep? I'm going to be honest with you. If you're not well slept, you're not a fun person to talk to. You're not a fun person to hang out with. You know what I'm saying? And so that community doesn't work too well. There's even a study that showed that people who are sleep deprived, this is going to sound weird, they send off like a vibe. I know that sounds a little woo-woo, okay? But they send off this impression like, don't mess with me. Like, think about, like, if you go to the office and you see somebody and it's Monday morning, let's say, and you know they really tied one on over the weekend, you don't want to talk to them, right? You know, you're like, I'm going to let you get your coffee. I'm going to let you sit down. I'm going to let you do your thing because you don't look like, that's the vibe. That's the message that you're sending. So if you live in a blue zone where community is such an important aspect, right, to the health and the wealth of those people there, I think sleep plays a big role.
Brilliant. And I just want to summarize, you got the dolphins. I think they're about 20%. Is that right, Dr. Breus? 10%. Then, you got your 20% are your lions, and then 50 to 55% are your bears. And then you've got your wolves, which make up the rest.
Yep, like 15 to 20% or so. Yep. So it really falls into interesting categories. But again, remember, you move through the categories as you age. So you could be in a transition, or you could be right in the chronotype that you're supposed to be. But as a general guideline, if you take the quiz, you'll figure it out pretty quick. And also, let's be fair. If you don't know, ask your parents, right? What are they, right? Because they'll know what you were like when you were a kid, for sure, right? So you can say, hey, mom, dad, was I easy to put down, to sleep? Or was I hard? Was I one of those kids that ran around all night? Or was I one of those kids that said, hey, mom, I want to go to bed? That tells us a lot about chronotypical behavior and kind of what that looks like there. But to be clear, you don't have to be super duper accurate. Just as a general guideline, if you fall into one of these categories, then we can tell you, hey, this is the best time of day to eat a cheeseburger. This is the best time of day to do an email. This is the best time of day to lift weights. Like, there's a whole host of different things that we can show you based on over 220 studies.
So if you're listening out there, you've got to go and do the test, and we're going to reveal when it's best time to have sex, because I know most people are having sex between 10:30, 11:30 from the research that I know. But let's talk about, I know on Jim Quick's podcast, you had like the first thing that's important, and then you had the second thing and the third and the fourth. And
my morning routine.
Yeah, on the morning routine, and how easy it was to actually remember them. I mean, I know between you and him, you've got these amazing like sort of mind memory hacks so that people can remember these things and apply them. Otherwise, it's all this knowledge, and we have to deconstruct them so people can actually implement them in their lives.
Got it. So you're looking for my 5-step plan, I think, is what you're talking about. So let's talk about that real quick, because it's super straightforward and people can really do it and do it easily. So step number 1 is to wake up at the same time 7 days a week, right? So 1 represents one time for waking up. So the number 1 is part of that's how you're going to remember it, because it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so number 1 is 1 wake up time. Hopefully it's based on your chronotype, but even if it's not, just being consistent is going to be helpful for your sleep. Step number 2 has to do with caffeine. So let's talk a little bit about caffeine. I know a lot of people are like, oh, he's talking about my favorite thing. I'm going to be straight up with you guys. Caffeine is horrible, horrible, horrible for sleep. Look, don't get me wrong. I enjoy coffee. I think there's some wonderful coffees out there, but people don't realize the length of time that coffee stays in your system and what it does. So remember, we were talking about adenosine and caffeine earlier, right? So remember, caffeine actually blocks adenosine. So caffeine doesn't give you energy. What caffeine does is prevents you from feeling sleepy. That is not good when you're trying to fall asleep, right? And so people don't even realize it, but caffeine has a half-life of between 6 and 8 hours. So a half-life, for folks out there who may not know, this is the amount of time that it takes your body to absorb and then get rid of caffeine, 6 to 8 hours. And that's only for 50%. So, right, it's crazy. Wow. So if it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you have a cup of coffee, at 10 o'clock at night, 50% of that coffee is still wandering around your brain. Here's a scarier statistic, okay, Steve, is the quarter life of caffeine. I just found this one out. So when 25% is still left, 12 hours.
Wow.
12 hours, bro. So here's the crazy part. You should be, look, I got no problems. You want to drink caffeine in the morning? Go ahead, have a cup around 10 o'clock. That should be it. That should be it, right? Because if let's say you have your last caffeine at 10, right? Then 12 hours later, it's going to be okay for you. But I can't get people to do that right out of the gates. So step number 2 is to stop caffeine by 2 p.m. So step number 1 wake up time. Step number 2, stop caffeine by 2 p.m. Step number 3 has to do with alcohol. I know I'm hitting all the pain points for everybody out there. So here's the thing. There's a really big difference between going to sleep and passing out, okay? We don't like the passing out part. That's not good for you. And alcohol basically destroys stage 3, 4 sleep, that physical restoration. By the way, we were just talking about caffeine a minute ago. Caffeine pretty much destroys REM sleep as well, which is, again, one of those things that you have to start thinking about when to do it. But back to alcohol. And so here's what we know is the impact of alcohol has to do with how close to lights out it is ingested and how much you ingest. There's 2 factors. So timing wise, you want to stop drinking alcohol 1 hour for every drink that you had. So let me explain. And then the amount of alcohol is you should stop at 2 drinks. Now, I understand if you're watching the big game or you're out with a bunch of friends, you might have more than 2 drinks. What I'm talking about here is your average evening type of thing, right? If you want to have a glass of wine with dinner, the sleep doctor's not going to say no. There's nothing wrong with having a glass of wine with dinner, okay? However, once you get past 2 drinks, you'll catch a buzz. When you catch a buzz, your brain thinks that something toxic is going on, because that's actually what a buzz is the killing of brain cells. So your brain says, this isn't good. And so what does it do? It jacks cortisol, which is one of those things that's the fight or flight. Remember how we were talking about the sympathetic system earlier? That's one of the things that it does when you have over 2 drinks of alcohol in your system. So all of a sudden, you're an energetic drunk at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's not helpful for sleep. So what we'd say is have 1 glass with dinner, have a second glass if you so choose. And then if you wait 3 hours, you're going to be good to go. So step number 3 is to stop drinking alcohol 3 hours before bed. And if you can, keep it to 2 drinks. Step number 4 is one of your favorites. It's all about exercise. You know, I'm a big fan. I know you're a big guy. You like to do all that kind of fun stuff. So it's awesome. But there is one caveat, is temperature. So a lot of people, if you don't realize it, when you exercise, your core body temperature begins to rise. Well, remember we were talking, you need your core body temperature to hit a peak and then fall for melatonin production to begin. So love that you exercise every day. There's a lot of data to suggest every single day exercise, 20 minutes. Like, you don't have to run a marathon, okay? Like, that's not going to help you. 20 minutes of activity moving around every single day, but don't do it 4 hours before bed. So step number 4 is to stop exercise 4 hours before bed. Step number 5 talks about my morning routine. So there's 3 things that I do every morning. I call it the 3:15s. So when I wake up, the first thing that I do is I take 15 deep breaths. So this is merely to wake up my respiratory system, to bring me present, right? This is part of my breath work that I do in the morning times. You can extend it and do whatever you want. I also like to do something called Wim Hof breathing. I have a group of men that we meet every morning on Zoom, and we do Wim Hof breathing together. We have a men's group. It's called Metal, and we love it. It's like self-help for men type of thing. So I'll do 15 deep breaths, and then exactly what you just did, 15 ounces of water. You know, many people don't know that sleep in and of itself is a dehydrative event. Yeah. You lose almost a full liter of water just from the humidity in your breath every single night. So a lot of people don't realize it. So look at it like this. I have 3 or 4, drinks before bed, which of course, once you start to use the restroom after you've had alcohol, you just start peeing and peeing and peeing. So you become dehydrated, you sleep, you become more dehydrated, you wake up. What should you do? You should drink some damn water. But most people, what do? Drink coffee. Yeah. Which is also a diuretic, which makes you even more dehydrated. So please, please, please do not have your first cup of coffee within 90 minutes of waking up. Okay. Wow. Drink 15 ounces of water and walk outside and get 15 minutes of sunshine. So remember, we were talking, sunlight hits the rods and cones of the eyes, sends a signal to the back of the brain saying, turn off the melatonin faucet in my head. Which is very, very important. And 15 minutes is the exact amount you need for vitamin D production, which everybody needs vitamin D production. So my 5 steps in summary: step number 1, wake up at the same time every single day. Step number 2, stop caffeine by 2 p.m. Step number 3, stop alcohol 3 hours before bed. Step number 4, stop exercise 4 hours before bed. And step number 5 is do the 3:15s, which is 15 deep breaths, 15 ounces of water, and what was the third one?
And 15
minutes of sunshine. Come on, I'm testing you here. 15 minutes of sunshine. That's right. So everybody can do these. And here's the best part about this plan. It's completely free. It seriously, it does not cost you a dime to do any of the things that I'm talking about here. And I will guarantee you that you will see a dramatic difference. It takes about 3 to 4 weeks of following these guidelines, but I can assure you, you start to see benefits within the first week.
Brilliant. I've got some questions. I think that's fantastic. Those are 5 takeaways. If you're listening out there, start with the foundational basics. Yes, you can get a sleep tracker. Yes, you can get blue blocking glass. You can do all those things, but start with those 5 basics that have been summarized so succinctly by Dr. Breus. But I know I'm going to get some questions about decaf, about tea in terms of caffeine content, because I think those are really, really important. What is your view on those 2?
So I don't have a problem with decaf coffee, but at the end of the day, there are better things that you can drink out there. If you want, I personally have really found I enjoy this mushroom coffee that's out there now. I personally use a brand called Four Sigmatic. I don't receive any money or anything like that from them, but I do really like their product. There's also another one that just came out that's a coffee and herb mix that uses decaf that I kind of like. But as a general rule, you really don't need decaf. Like, I get it. You like the taste of coffee and all that kind of good stuff. But if you can, I'm always going to be pushing more for decaf. Now, tea is very, very different because tea comes in all kinds of different caffeinated levels. But what I would say is a general guideline, my favorite's green tea. And the reason it's my favorite is green tea is because of the L-theanine that's so present in green tea, which is so good for you in so many different ways, but also, believe it or not, good for sleep. And green tea doesn't have a large level of caffeine in it, not like a black tea would or something along those lines. But if you're thinking, hey, I need some kind of a stimulant to keep me going, you want to look at what the quality of your sleep is, because you really shouldn't need a stimulant. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you enjoy green tea and you want to be healthy, great, go for it. But at the end of the day, if you're drinking something to help keep you up, let's look at the reasons why you're not sleeping well.
Brilliant. But those 2 are not going to affect your sleep if you have them after 2 o'clock, not decaf or any tea, even black tea, it's not going to have a huge impact on your sleep?
No, that's not what I said. Green tea is not going to have a big effect,
Okay.
but those higher caffeinated ones like black tea, they will have an effect. So you really want to keep that caffeine level as down as possible and stop everything by 2 o'clock.
Stop everything by 2. Then the last thing you said, 90 minutes before your coffee. That's going to throw a lot of my audience in terms of afterwards. Is that got to do with adenosine receptors, why you should wait the 90 minutes, or what is the reason?
Such a great question. So it has to do with cortisol and adrenaline, right? So in order for the brain to pull itself out of a state of unconsciousness, you need 2 hormones. You need cortisol and adrenaline, and they both need to be jacked up or pretty high. Here's the thing. When you've got cortisol and adrenaline wandering around your brain, when you add caffeine, it does almost nothing. Most people, by the way, who tell me, oh, I've got to have my first cup of coffee, they never have one. They usually have 2 or 3 cups of coffee. And here's why. When you take a brain that's got adrenaline and cortisol and you add caffeine, all you get are side effects, because adrenaline and cortisol, if you look at how powerful they are versus caffeine, it's like comparing cocaine to weak tea. Okay. So, but if you just wait 90 minutes, the natural cortisol and adrenaline curve starts to drop after you've woken up. Then if you have caffeine, it actually lifts the cortisol back up a little bit. So you get a bigger bang for your buck. So what you want to do is you want to wait for it to come down, then add the caffeine and get to it. 90 minutes after you open your eyes. So not after you've done your morning routine. At like you're getting up at 6:30, then that means at 8 o'clock, you can have your cup of coffee.
Brilliant, Dr. Breus. And then we've got 2 last questions. I know we're coming to the end of the show. I know you've said so many words so quickly that you're just a wealth of information. But tell me about supplements, L-theanine, taurine, myo-inositol, melatonin. Which are your favorites? Phosphatidylserine. You know, these things that can have real impacts on sleep. We use them. Some of them are dangerous. Some of them can cause sort of an inability to sleep without them. So give us your overall view on supplementation.
Absolutely. So this is how I approach supplementation. When I have a patient who comes to me, very first thing I want to know is how's their body working. So vitamin D, iron, magnesium, and melatonin. I test for all 4. That's the first thing I do. So before we go out there and we say ashwagandha, valerian, melatonin, we need to see if your body is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. So step number 1 is to make sure that this unit is on par, meaning that you don't have any deficiencies. Because here's what happens. You may not know it, but your deficiency could be driving your sleep quality issue. So fix that first, right? So get your doctor, do the blood work. Great. Okay, let's say that all of that looks good for you. I'll tell you why I'm not a fan of melatonin. Okay. So remember, melatonin is a hormone. Okay. You can't just walk down to the local health food store and buy testosterone or estrogen, right? And there's a reason for that, because when you put a hormone into the body, it can have effects in multiple systems. It's not very specific. It's more global, right? So number 1, know what you're getting into. Number 2, in most places of Europe, it's by prescription only. In Australia, you can't get it unless you have a prescription or you're over the age of 55. Why is that? Because people my age, melatonin production begins to slow. So there are really 3 types of people out there that should be taking melatonin. Shift workers, right? Because you want to move your body clock, because melatonin is a sleep regulator, not a sleep initiator. People experiencing jet lag, right? So flying from one place to another, you can move your circadian clock. And then people who are my age and older, 55 and up, where we see a slight decrease in the overall production of melatonin. That can be helpful as well. Now, I'm going to also tell you a couple other things about melatonin. It is not in the right dosage ever. The correct dose is between 0.5 and 1.5 milligrams. 95% of the melatonin that's available is in 3 milligram, 5 milligram, 10 milligram. These are overdosage quantities, and it's not healthy. Number 1, you'll get funky dreams if you're overdosing. Number 2, it just won't work particularly well. Less is more when it comes to melatonin. Also, interestingly, the format that it comes in plays a role as to when it becomes effective. So as an example, if you take a melatonin tablet, swallow it, it's going to take almost 90 minutes for it to go down, get digested, get into the bloodstream, and then get up into your brain to have an effect. But if you use a dropper, like a liquid, sublingual, you can put it underneath your tongue, you can get it up and in 30 minutes. If Now, remember, when you put it in your mouth, let it sit on your tongue, like count to 60, like literally let it absorb. Like that's what I tell my patients. Turn off the light, count to 60, then swallow, then you'll start to see. Then it takes about 30 minutes in that particular form factor. So understanding the dose, understanding when to take it, and which situations make the most sense is going to be important for melatonin. Couple of caveats. Never, ever, ever do I recommend melatonin in children. Ever, ever, ever. Here's why. There's data to now show that children produce between 3 and 4 times the amount of melatonin that they need. So there's no universe where they need it. There is one group that does need it. And this is an interesting group. These are children on the autism spectrum. There's a very interesting, some data like at 5 and 7 milligrams. Some of these kids do very, very well with melatonin. We don't exactly know why, and to be fair, I don't know a lot about that research, but what I can tell you is we know it's effective at higher dosages in that population. So that's about the only population of children where I would want them to try it. Because here's the problem with a lot of pediatricians out there saying, oh, just give your child, if they're not sleeping, give your kid some melatonin. It's not going to hurt them because it's natural. Here's the problem. You just told your child that they need a pill to sleep. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? So I'm not a big fan of using that. Now, let's say your blood work looks good, your melatonin is fine, but you still have a difficult time either falling asleep or staying asleep. Believe it or not, if you look at the data, the number one treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy. Not only does it work better, but it lasts longer. Because here's the problem is you're basically substituting some herb or some pharmaceutical to force your body into an unconscious state. Cognitive behavioral therapy actually helps you forever. So once you learn the techniques and the tools, which I'm actually qualified to teach people, you end up being able to sleep forever, not just when you have the pill and become dependent upon the pill, whatever the pill might be. Now, another area that a lot of people like to ask me about is cannabis. I don't know, in South Africa, is cannabis legal?
Yeah.
There?
Yeah.
So here's where I think some very interesting things are going to happen in the space in the future. I would argue that many pharmaceuticals for sleep, Ambiens, Lunestas, Sonatas, they're going to fall by the wayside, and we're just going to see an increase in cannabis use. And here's why. There's no gatekeeper, right? For Ambien, the doctor's got to write the prescription, and doctors do not like to write prescriptions for sleeping pills because then the person ends up with a pill problem. So a lot of people are going out and they're buying cannabis to help them sleep. Let's talk about it for just a second because it's an important area that I think people need to understand. The cannabis plant is an awesome plant. I'm very pro cannabis. However, when you have too much THC on board, that's the main psychoactive component of cannabis, it lowers REM sleep and it increases heart rate. Those are two things that are not good for sleep at all. However, THC is helpful because so many people have got so much anxiety. So what I tell people is you want a ratio. You want to have a low amount of THC, and there's two other constituents that you may want to consider. One is called CBN, as in Nancy. This is actually oxidized THC, which has been shown in papers out of Israel to help people fall asleep and stay asleep quite quickly. There's another one called CBD. Now, I want to be very clear about CBD. CBD does not help sleep. However, CBD helps anxiety and helps pain. So if you're not sleeping because of anxiety or pain, it might be a helpful tool for you. But I want to be clear, you need almost 120 milligrams of CBD, right? It's like a whole bottle to get enough of an effect to make you feel sleepy, at least according to the data that's currently in the literature right now. So when I'm looking for supplementation, what's the thing what's kind of like my number one go-to for people for falling asleep or staying asleep? I would argue it's a combination of L-theanine and valerian. I've had a lot of luck with using those with certain people. But again, everybody's kind of a little bit different. And you also have to understand what's their history. So as an example, somebody shows up in my office and they've been taking Ambien for 5 years. I'm not sticking them on valerian because that shit's not going to work. You know what I'm saying? So we have to understand like their history, what they've been on, what they've tried, also the severity of the diagnosis. I want to be clear. I'm not a pill pusher. I'm not a supplement pusher. I'm a cognitive behavioral therapy pusher. But If that doesn't work, or you want to use something in combination with CBT, that could be an interesting situation with a valerian. Hops is another one. And valerian and hops, when working together, appear to have some significant data that can be helpful. But remember, if you're consistently needing something to fall asleep, you really want to start to look at what's going on with my sleep, right? Is it anxiety? Because, by the way, that 75% of the reason people don't sleep is because of either anxiety or depression. The other 25% is medicine, or environment. Right. So it's either I've got low back pain, that's medical, that can prevent me from sleeping. A medicine, like I'm taking a drug that has an effect that makes me feel not sleepy any longer, or the other. So at the end of the day, you really need to kind of start to think through, where do you want to go? Because many professionals may not have the same routine that I'm explaining right now. A lot of professionals will just write a prescription and they'll say, here, take an Ambien for 30 days and come back and see me. You're still going to have the same problem 30 days later, I would argue. And I don't think it's really what the people who listen to this particular podcast are interested in. My understanding of your audience is these are people who are healthy, who want to continue to be healthy, want to live long lives, and want to figure out some of the ways without medicine to be healthier, have better wellness and things like that. So I lean less towards those pharmaceuticals, but I also want to be clear about one other point. There are some people out there that need a pill to sleep, and that's okay. All right. If you've got paranoid schizophrenia, if you've got bipolar disorder, and you and your doctor have determined that a pharmaceutical helps you sleep, do not turn that away. Do exactly what your doctor is telling you. That is an important decision between you and your doctor. I want to be very, very clear about that. Also, unfortunately, many doctors don't have a lot of knowledge base in things like cannabis or supplementation. So you really need to seek out professionals who have either degrees or published papers or things like that that have studied these areas and are known for them. So that way you can really get the good information, like what we get here when you interview all of your awesome guests.
Brilliant. On supplementation, there's a lot of value, a lot of info. We're going to unpack that significantly over the weeks to come. Well done. From melatonin to CBD to CBN to L-theanine to valerian. I think that's really important, and I think there's going to be another discussion in the future. We've had Dr. Patrick Porter in terms of brain tap. We've had Dr.
I love Patrick.
Rabin.
He's awesome.
Yeah, Dr. David Rabin in terms of the Apollo. We've had Brian Richards from Sauna Space, which we bring in infrared saunas here. We've got the chili pad here and the Ula.
I'm a big fan of that too. Dude, you've got all the good stuff.
Yeah, I've seen your website. I've spent a lot of time looking. I've learned a lot from you. You know, I don't know you. First time I've met you, but you've been an inspiration. The Power of When, your book, Energize, your book. I've been through your things. I think I'm recommending your sleep course. I just think there's so much value. The quiz, there's so much value. But the last question is, in terms of devices, there's so much out there. You know, where has been the greatest move for you with your clients? You got a huge empirical sort of research base of what has worked for people, like blue blocking devices, like on your head and that. What are the top 3 or 4 sort of devices that you would recommend for sleep?
Yep. So I'm going to say something that's going to be a little contrarian, but I think you'll like it. Is number one, you got to start with your bed and your pillow. I can tell you exactly which devices that I like and which ones I think have had impact on my patients, but I want to be clear. If you've got a shitty bed and a shitty pillow, you're going to get shitty sleep. That's just the bottom line. That's how that works, right? So people have to understand that that's an important aspect, because your sleep system, I would argue, affects your sleep probably in the neighborhood of 10 to 15%, right? So if you sleep on a bed that looks like a taco, you ain't going to get good rest, right? If you've got a pillow where your head is jacked to one side most of the time and you got a neck cramp, you aren't going to get good sleep. So number one, if you haven't bought a new mattress in a while, go to my website. I've actually created a mattress buying guide that you can go to. You don't have to buy a mattress on my website. I mean, you can if you want, but the guide is really there to help to show you, hey, what's the best mattress for a side sleeper versus a stomach sleeper? What about somebody with low back pain? So get those things straight first. Talking about technology, a couple of things that I can tell you have a big impact on sleep. The biggest, temperature. Without question, when you are thinking about what to look at you're in your bed at night, temperature is a big one. I personally use a chili pad. Every night we have it on the bed. Also, my wife is going through, she's of that age where she is moving into the direction where it can get a little bit warmer on occasion in the evenings. And so she has found some great solace in being able to regulate that temperature. So I really do like the temperature regulatory aspects, either the chili pad, or there's a really cool device that people use for insomnia called the EBB, EBB. This helps slow down thinking. It actually cools your head and slows down the thinking. So it's one of those things I use for a lot of my insomnia clients. They really seem to dig it. Other things that I like blue light blocking glasses. I always have. But to be clear, when you look at the literature on blue light blocking glasses, number one, make sure you got the right kind. There are three aspects to blue light that you need to understand. One is the frequency, two is the brightness, and then the final one is the angle, right? And so when you buy a pair of glasses, the angle becomes important because you don't want extra light to come up under, from the side. So like the glasses you have on that are wrapped are much better because they really, they prevent any excess light from coming in. So that's number one. Number two, I like the color of your glasses. So a lot of people now are finding clear blue light blocking glasses. That's bullshit, okay? Because the brightness, there's no change in the brightness. And so you still get all of this brightness, which is affecting potentially your circadian rhythm. Then, of course, there needs to be some sort of a coating to be able to get the 460 to 480 nanometer filter so that you don't get the blue light in. All of that being said, one thing to remember is blue light, while it can have an effect, it's not the biggest thing in the toolbox, okay? And it also depends a lot on how much blue light you've gotten during the daytime. So as an example, if you're a gamer and you're, and you're in the dark, right? And all you got is the computer screen blasting at you, blue light's going to have an effect on you. But if you get outside, and your body is getting used to it, it has much less of an effect. But I do think it's worthwhile because here's the thing. Most people fall asleep to the television, right? So what I'll do is I'll have my blue lighters on and then I can watch TV and then, push them off to fall asleep. But the real magic that I've seen personally has been with my Apollo. I love this thing. So to break it down for people, and you might have already talked about Apollo a little bit, but Apollo it's very interesting. So remember how we were talking about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system before, and how the parasympathetic, that rest and digest, really helps relax you and get you to sleep better? This thing affects that. Now, that's a big statement, okay? And I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't believe it for a second until I met Dr. Rabin, until I started pouring through the research, because he gave me all the data. He's like, you don't believe me? Awesome. Take a look. Because that's how he is. Dave, he's awesome. So I get in there and I start looking at the data. I'm like, holy shit, like this thing really works. So I started putting it on a lot of my patients, and we're really starting to see some interesting results. Now, I want to be clear about something. This isn't an overnight fix. Okay, this takes some time. I've seen, and remember we were talking about HRV. This raises HRV while you sleep, which is even better, right? So it's like, dude, this is killer. So for me, understanding the science, I became a big fan. And now I talk about Apollo almost everywhere I go. As you see, I've got one here on my wrist that I enjoy wearing. And I even have my wife wearing one because she's going through that, kind of weird time. And so we're hopefully trying to help her out. So I think those are some of the places. But once again, the 5-step program, it's completely free. Everybody out there can do it. I highly, highly recommend it. If you're worried about tracking your sleep and you don't want to spend a lot of money on a tracker, there are sleep diaries on the internet that are paper and pencil. You just write it down and track it. That's how we used to do it before trackers, and it worked just fine. So again, if you don't want to spend that dough, if you're looking to make an investment in technology to help you sleep, I would argue either the Apollo or the Chili are two great places to start to look at, but it's going to depend on you, right? And so if you're a female who's 50 years old and going through menopause, the Chili Pad might be exactly what the doctor ordered. If you're a male who's 50 years old and trying to just lead a better life, then the Apollo might work better for you. So really thinking about where the deficit is and what you're trying to fix is a good place to start.
Brilliant. We're coming to the end of the show. I've been in practice 24 years. I've seen people just with their sleep just absolutely degrade their sort of mental health, their physical health. Sleep seems to be going in the wrong direction for people across the board, whether they're children, teens, adolescents, whoever they are, even the older folk. There's so much noise in the system. I mean, the average person now in one day receives more stimulation than someone who lived in the 1400s in their whole lifetime. So we are just getting so much noise. Give us a message of hope, Dr. Breus, because it just seems like we're losing the war to chronic disease. We're losing the war to quality of sleep. Where is sleep going in the future?
So here's the good news is sleep has now become the little black dress of health. So we're finally starting, like here in the United States, there was this big thing which is like the healthy 7 things you're supposed to do, and sleep was not even on there. This year, when now it's the healthy 8 because they've added sleep. Right. So where is sleep in the future? I think we're still fighting to get noticed. But what I will tell you is I do more media now than I've ever done in my life. I'm on television or in magazines every single day because there's a need for people to understand more about their sleep. I would also tell you there are more apps now than we've ever seen before for sleep. So I think what we're going to start to see, so there's 2 areas of future sleep. One is sleep medicine, and one is consumer sleep. Okay. Where is sleep medicine going? I think over the course of time, we're going to see more home testing and more things done in the home because the laboratory environment, it's not very conducive to sleep, number one. It'll probably be reserved for complicated cases. So people who can't put the stuff on themselves or who have multiple diseases, going on. If you got somebody with MS and you think they've got sleep apnea, you need to stick them in a lab. They can't do that shit at their house, right? But as a general guideline, right, most people, what we'll start to see is there's going to be a shift to diagnostics in the home, I think, which is going to be good. And we'll start to see more devices become more diagnostic as well, which I think will be interesting. However, we have to pace ourselves with the information because so many people get drilled into one thing or another and they really, don't understand it. That's why on the medicine side, you really want to have a physician involved. If you think it's sleep apnea, narcolepsy, restless legs, periodic limb movements, even insomnia in some cases. On the consumer sleep side, I think it's like a freaking Wild West out there. People are showing up with all kinds of products and things for people to try. I love trying all the new stuff, but one of the things I want to be very clear about with people is be objective, right? So if you're going to try a new program, a new app, a new product or whatever, monitor yourself before, then monitor yourself during, and then take yourself off of the product and monitor yourself again. It's called an ABA design. What this does is it really tells you if the factor of whatever it is you instituted actually worked. Because there's so much snake oil out there and there's so many different things that people don't really know about yet. To be fair, if you're looking for more information on supplementation, my favorite place are the Commission E reports out of Germany. They do the best job at really looking at all of these. They test every single thing that comes into that country in about 10 different ways. So it really works out nicely. But be buyer beware, be careful out there, but be exploratory, be curious. Here's what I can tell you. Everybody can sleep. Everybody. I have never met a patient that could not sleep. Okay. So remember that. Nobody out there has got a broken sleeper switch in their head. It's literally about having somebody spend some time with you and understand, where's it coming from? Is it anxiety? Is it medication? Is it environment? Is it something you're doing that's silly that you don't even realize is having an effect? Is it stress? There's a whole host of things. And by the way, it's usually multifactorial, but have a real discussion with your doctor or somebody that you know and care and trust about who knows and understands sleep to really help you kind of get there. But I'm here to tell you, sleep is awesome. We are all going to continue to get more and more of it. And I think the future is going to hold with us maybe even higher quality sleep. I would argue that I think that we will start to see medications, supplementation, even devices that will help improve sleep quality for folks who may not have great sleep quality to begin with.
Brilliant. Wise words from the sleep doctor. Got an incredible website. You have to do the quiz. It's really incredible. It'll give you so much revelation. And then you'll do it for your spouse or your partner or your kids. So I just want to declare favor and blessing over you, Dr. Breus. You're a pioneer. You're inspirational. You got zeal. You got zest. You want to educate. You want to empower. The word doctor is the word docere, which means teacher. My audience knows that. I hammer it into them because we want to teach and empower people. We don't want to enslave them to any type of device or supplement. We want to empower them. There's that 5-step process. So thank you so much. And I just want to see you just live out your dreams and your purposes in terms of what you want to do with your life, because I think you're going to be going on for many, many years. Thank you.
I think I am too. And thank you for saying that. And by the way, we have to make good on our promise and tell people when the best time for sex is.
Tell us.
So we're at the end of the podcast, so we're here to tell you. So I'll go through it. So basically, you need 5 hormones to have successful intimacy. You need estrogen, testosterone. You need adrenaline, cortisol, and all to be high, and progesterone, and you need melatonin to be low. Okay. So number one, what do you think your hormone profile looks like at night? By the way, most people, as you correctly identified, like to have sex somewhere between 10 and 11:30 at night. So what do you think your hormone profile looks like?
Not good then. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's the opposite, right? All the things that you need high are low, and all the things that you need low are high. So that's hint number one as to when is the best time to have intimacy. Hint number two, what do most men wake up with in the morning? An erection.
Yeah.
If that's not Mother Nature telling you when to use that thing, I don't know what is, right? So here's what I'm telling people is try to be intimate in the morning time. Do me a favor, go brush your teeth before you do it, right? Hop out of bed, brush your teeth, then hop back in bed with your partner, male, female, doesn't matter. Yeah. And really what we're learning is connection. Is morning time is a better time for connection. Also for men with erectile issues, men have much more testosterone and much better chance of having a successful erection and a successful orgasm in the morning time than they do in the evening. So I'm here to tell you, it doesn't matter what your chronotype is, sex in the morning is probably a good idea. But if you do get my book, what you will find is we actually created a matrix. So you can put your chronotype across one and because what if you and your chronotype partner are different chronotypes?
Yeah.
Like what if you're an early bird and your partner's a night owl? How does that work? We show you how it works. We also created two other matrices, one for homosexual couples and one for lesbian couples, because the hormones are different.
Yeah. Brilliant. And so where can people find you? I know you've got a lot of social media. You're growing every single day.
Yep. So people can find me on TikTok. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook and on Twitter, all with the same handle, The Sleep Doctor. You can find me in all of those places, or swing on over to thesleepdoctor.com. Check out my site. Go to Chrono Quiz. You're going to learn a ton. You're going to have a good time.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dr. Breus.